and gentlemen, please welcome Golf General Manager Trump National Doral.